side. Well, maybe a lot of drugs. He ended up dead. The other made his friends in politics. He did a lot of fundraising and met some important people. He was named to head a federal commission, and he ran it with his high school pals and people he met on airplanes. He ran it right into the ground. The government is still trying to figure out and raw talent and guts and money. In the movie business, it sometimes seems as if there's an awfully thin line between genius and fraud. There is so much money at stake and so many deals being made and so much hot air being blown around. There are plenty of opportunities for self-promoters with a roll of ready cash. In the 1980s, there was another volatile ingredient permeating the Hollywood scene: cocaine. Exposé's chief correspondent Brian Ross has a Hollywood story that includes a blonde, a cocaine deal, a multi-million-dollar movie, and a murder.
Among Hollywood's beautiful people in the 1980s, this woman, Laney Jacobs, was the queen of cocaine. Her never-ending supply of drugs made her a millionaire and as sought after as any starlet. But only now is the incredible story coming out of just how Laney Jacobs, the sexy, blonde coke dealer, came straight out of the violent world of big-time cocaine dealers in Miami to the top of the movie business, to a cell in the county jail, charged with murder over a movie. This was one of the big budget movies of the 1980s, The Cotton Club, the story of the famous Harlem nightclub in New York.
What is it you want, Dutch? What is it?
The movie starred Richard Gere and Gregory Hines as entertainers caught up in a world of gangsters and violence in the Roaring '20s. The Cotton Club was directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and even though Laney Jacobs' name is not in the credit, it turns out that long before the cameras started to roll, Laney Jacobs was in the middle of the Cotton Club deal. The producer of the movie, Robert Evans, was part of Laney Jacobs' cocaine world, one of her lovers. Evans, a movie maker with movie star good looks, who, until he almost destroyed himself with cocaine and his relationship with Laney Jacobs, was a very big name in Hollywood, the head of production at Paramount, the man who made The Godfather.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
And Chinatown.
No, I'm sorry.
And Love Story.
Court is now in session.
Now, in a Los Angeles courtroom, Laney Jacobs, looking very prim and proper, a lot different from when she was queen of Hollywood cocaine, is on trial for murder. The murder in 1983 of a man involved in a kind of sex, drugs, movie triangle with Laney Jacobs and Robert Evans that reveals a lot about how one big budget movie was made in Hollywood in the coked-up 1980s.
I was selling cocaine.
Also on trial with Jacobs, 3 of her bodyguards in the drug business, who prosecutors say were the triggermen in the murder. The murder victim was Roy Radin, a nobody in Hollywood, who actually had made a lot of money with the touring roadshow of old vaudeville performers.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Roy Reagan's tribute to vaudeville.
In Hollywood, Radin became a big cocaine customer of Laney Jacobs, and that's how he met Robert Evans as a potential source of big money to help make the Cotton Club movie.
So they shared a coke dealer and they got in business together.
Well, and Laney made the introductions, or set this introduction thing up.
Jonathan Lawson was Roy Radin's closest friend, and police say he is lucky to be alive. He was supposed to be killed with Radin.
So this big cocaine dealer, Laney Jacobs, was the person who brought together 2 producers in a major motion picture deal.
Yes.
No one was surprised about that at the time?
No. Well, you seem to be surprised now. Why? A coke dealer could be in a position to put together 2 producers to create a film.
And this was the Cotton Club.
And that was the Cotton Club.
The Cotton Club murder case began with what police say was a trap set for Roy Radin at one of Los Angeles' top restaurants, La Scala, a place where studio bosses and producers and stars can be seen every night making big movie deals over La Scala's famous veal Milanese. According to the testimony at the trial, Radin was picked up at his apartment building in a limousine by Laney Jacobs to go to La Scala to talk things out after the two had quarreled bitterly over cocaine and the Cotton Club movie deal. But Radin never got there. Weeks later, in a remote area north of Los Angeles, a beekeeper, Glenn Fisher, made a grisly discovery.
I crossed through a dry wash and went around a bush, and around the bush there was a hand sticking up, and there was a body laying there.
He'd been shot and rolled.
Homicide detectives say Roy Radin was marched up this hill and then executed in such a brutal way that the body, when found, bore little resemblance to a human being. Homicide detective Carlos Avila.
It was very severe. You know, you take account that the man's been shot in the back of the head 8 to 10 times, and then you see how the face had been distorted with a quarter, what amounted to a quarter stick of dynamite.
Blown up in his mouth?
Yeah, in his mouth. Just placed it right in his mouth and lit it and blew it up, and that's brutal.
But it's all over a movie. That's the thing that is so shocking, it seems.
Yes.
When you got in the car with Mr. Radin...
On the witness stand this week, Laney Jacobs said she and Radin and Evans were having a dispute over the Cotton Club, but that she had nothing to do with the murder. That without her knowledge, her bodyguards had killed Roy Radin.
And that's when he was killed, is that correct?
I didn't have him killed, Mr. Kahn.
The murder took Roy Radin out of the Cotton Club movie deal, but it didn't stop Robert Evans from making the film, which came out a year later in 1984 and was a box office disaster, soon forgotten. And for a time, it looked like the murder of Roy Radin would be forgotten, and that some people in Hollywood wanted it forgotten. Back east, Radin's sister, Kate, waited year after year for police in Los Angeles to arrest somebody for her brother's murder.
I've been calling Los Angeles once a week for 6.5 years.
Kate Radin says what bothered her most was that even in death, her brother Roy was being treated like a Hollywood nobody, and that the Hollywood somebody, Robert Evans, according to the police, wasn't helping much in the investigation of the Cotton Club and Laney Jacobs.
She was his drug dealer. You know, she was sleeping with Bob Evans. If she mentioned anything to him, he needs to come forth and tell. It's one thing, you know, again, I understand he's a Hollywood producer, okay? My brother could have been a Hollywood producer. He will never have that chance.
I felt awful, Mr. Kahn, about what had happened.
On the witness stand, in testimony that shocked prosecutors, Laney Jacobs said that soon after she found out that Roy Radin had been murdered, weeks before the body was discovered, she told Evans.
And what did you tell him about what had happened?
That Mr. Radin had been killed.
You never thought about whether or not Mr. Evans would call the police and tell him that he had just been informed about a murder?
Mr. Kahn, I don't really remember what I thought about.
So Mr. Evans had no advance knowledge that a murder was going to take place, did he?
Absolutely not.
If Laney Jacobs is telling the truth, Robert Evans, one of Hollywood's best-known producers, kept quiet while police spent more than 5 years trying to solve the case. Evans would not talk with expose, and in a pretrial hearing, he refused to testify, invoking the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination.
But unequivocally,
the only other time Evans is known to have been asked in public about Roy Radin was in this 1985 interview with a freelance reporter, whose questions made Evans angry.
He resented.
You know Roy Radin?
If you start getting into that, I'm just going to walk off the show right now.
Evans later walked out of the interview.
Mr. Evans? Mr. Evans?
And finally ordered the camera crew off his property. This week, a lawyer for Evans said Evans, in his lawyer's words, was absolutely not involved in any aspect of the murder of Roy Radin.
See that place on that phone bill?
Laney Jacobs was on the stand every day this week, undergoing cross-examination from prosecutors and the lawyers for the men on trial with her.
Isn't it the case that in reality the reason Mr. Radin was killed was because he stood between you and the Cotton Club deals being completed? Same objection.
Absolutely not, Mr. Kennedy.
And now, almost 8 years to the day that Roy Radin was murdered, a jury is about to decide the fate of the woman who, for a while, brought together the worlds of big-time Hollywood and big-time cocaine.
Last week, Brian Ross introduced us to a couple of grandmothers who were fighting mad at the mafia, Patty Wallace and Ruth Colvin from Louisa, Kentucky. They were